For a long time, I thought the first thing I needed to build with the donkey was curiosity. So I'd bring them into the gentling pens and start working with them right away, trying to create engagement through interaction. It was simple, like, will you eat next to me? But over time, I've started changing that approach. Now, I bring them in just to observe, not to ask anything yet, but to understand where they're starting from before I ever begin. Before, I would move pretty quickly into trying to build curiosity. I would offer hay and hang out in the pen with them. I would ask them to come closer, interact, and stay engaged with me. And with some donkeys, that worked really well. They would naturally explore, investigate, and start participating. So I assumed that was the normal starting point. But with others, that same approach didn't produce the same results. And instead of adjusting the starting point, I just kept trying to build the same response. What I've started noticing in the early stage is that I can learn a lot just by slowing down and not asking for anything right away. Because when I rush into interaction, I can sometimes miss what they're actually showing me before I ever ask a question. So now, instead of trying to create a response, I'm paying more attention to what's already there when I first bring them in. Are they moving toward things or away from things? Are they standing and observing or constantly looking for an exit? Are they interested in the environment or just trying to manage their space? Those small things tell me more about where I should start than anything I could try to gain in curiosity in that moment. So I'm trying to make the first part about understanding them before it ever becomes about asking anything of them. What I started seeing is that not every donkey comes in mentally ready for the same type of interaction. Some are willing already to investigate. Some are cautious, but still thinking. And some are still in that survival mindset where thinking comes much later. With Richard especially, that became very clear because his progress didn't start with curiosity. It started with clarity and then comfort. And only after that did curiosity begin to show up in a real way, even later in his progress. That made me realize something important. It wasn't just shaping behavior. It was also influencing whether they could access thinking at all in that moment. I think part of what kept me stuck there was that I had seen enough donkeys respond well to that approach that I assumed it would apply across the board and be the easiest on them. So instead of slowing down and reassessing what I actually was seeing right in front of me, I just kept trying to apply the same starting point. And it worked in some situations. But in others, it didn't match where the donkey was mentally when we first started, and kept them in survival mode for longer than I would prefer for their health and well-being. Now, when I bring them into the gentling pens, I slow everything down at the start. I'm not immediately asking any questions like, will you eat hay next to me? I'm watching first. I'm noticing whether they lean in, stay back, or just quietly observe. Because those small choices tell me more than anything I could try to create. If a donkey is already willing to engage, I can start working with touch and interaction sooner. But if they're more cautious, I can shift my focus to clarity first. Not pressure, just helping them relax while I'm in the pen with them. Helping them understand what's happening around them so they can settle mentally. Because I've learned that if I try to move too fast with just creating curiosity, I don't actually speed up learning. I can slow it down. or even push them into answers that don't help them long term. I think one of the things I've had to be careful with assuming that waiting for curiosity is always the right answer. Because in some cases, what I was actually doing was just staying in the same place for too long, not offering enough clarity for them to understand what I was asking. Now, I don't mean firmness in a heavy way. I mean clarity in the sense of helping them understand the question before I ever expect the answer. Because if they don't understand the question yet, then waiting for curiosity to show up doesn't really help them move forward. It can actually keep them in that uncertain space longer than they need to be. And what I'm realizing now is that clarity doesn't replace curiosity. It creates the conditions where curiosity can actually show up later. So instead of trying to sit and wait for something to change, I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing what they actually need in order to understand what I'm asking in the first place. And that's a big shift for me. I used to think I was doing something wrong for them if I didn't help them find curiosity first. Broken Ear is a good example of this. When I first brought him into the gentling pens, he was extremely reactive. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. Now I recognize it as a donkey that was still in a very high survival state. Since then, just being in a different environment has started to change how he responds to people. He is beginning to show curiosity in his own way, but it's slower and it requires more awareness of where he's starting from. I think what it really comes down to for me is realizing that donkeys aren't all starting from the same place mentally when we meet them. Some are already open to interaction, some are cautious but still thinking, and some are just trying to feel safe enough to understand what's even being asked of them. And if you rush past that, we just end up changing the kind of answer we're going to get. So now I'm trying to become more intentional about noticing that starting point instead of assuming it. Because when I get that part right, everything else becomes a lot clearer for both of us. The biggest shift for me was realizing I was sometimes waiting for curiosity to appear before I changed anything else. Now, in some cases, that kept them stuck longer than necessary in survival mode. Because if a donkey is still in survival mode, they're not really available to learn in the way I was asking. Now, this is not because they're unwilling, but because they don't yet have the clarity to even think about responding differently. And over time, they'll default to whatever answer brings them relief in the moment. So what I do differently now is simple. I start with observation instead of expectation. A big part of that is just letting them observe us. This includes moving them to a pen while I gentle other donkeys, letting them see me clean the pens, get water, throw hay, all of that stuff that I would normally be doing as I move around the barn. I try to meet each donkey where they actually are when I first meet them, not where I assume they should be or what I assumed all donkeys need. Because when that part is right, everything that follows becomes much clearer, safer, and easier for both of us, helping them get out of survival mode and enjoy being around humans.